Uber and Lyft drivers, what's your most NSFW story? My two stories would have to be a lady who was kinda drunk and kept asking me questions and moaning slightly every now and then. When she got out of the car, I checked the backseat and there was a Sharpie. A sticky Sharpie. That was obviously used for something. The other was two strippers that had a long ride and kept daring each other to flash me. Give me a back rub. Suck my earlobe. That progressively got to the point where one dared the other to hook up with me when we got to their house. Edit. Yes, I hooked up with the red-headed stripper. I had recently broken up with my girlfriend and it was a real ego boost to feel wanted like that by someone that hot. I thought it was implied sorry for leaving people hanging. I picked up a client who said he was on his way to the hospital to get something removed. It was very clear by his movements that he had something stuck in his ass. I asked if he needed an ambulance instead, but he said he didn't have insurance so he couldn't afford it. After I dropped him off and helped him in, I got back in the car and looked back to find a blood stain on the seat. The morals of the story are 1. If you're poor, don't shove things in your ass that can get stuck. 2. Never get light grey upholstery in your new car. Seems like the moral of all this is that if you are an Uber driver, then you should cover the entire passenger section of your car in disposable plastic. A mate of mine drives Grab, which is basically a Southeast Asian version of Uber. Once picked up a guy and 3 girls. Turned out the guy was a pimp and the girls were hookers. And the 4 were being tailed by the cops for illicit prostitution. And my friend was forced to involve. Long story short, they got stopped by the cops and my friend explained that it was his birthday and they were going to an orgy for his birthday. And no orgy for him. He did get a nice tip though. Edit. Picked up a handful of drunk high school kids at 2 AM. They just finished their graduation party and they were hammered. One of them threw up in the back. We had to stop on the side of the highway for him to get everything out of his system. He went behind the bush and did a number 2. But he didn't have any tissue. It was f***ing disgusting the whole way. Puke and shit are a surprisingly nasty combination. Puke and shit are a surprisingly nasty combination. That doesn't sound very surprising to me. I picked up a drunk couple from a bar. As soon as they got in the car, the woman was telling me about the cocaine they just did in the bathroom. She then went on to tell me that she was his maid and they were f***ing and his wife didn't know. She would wear the wife's lingerie. Also, she was screwing around with the wife. I was taking them to the guy's secret apartment where he did cocaine and screwed his maid. He felt a little bad for me, so he gave me all the cash that he had as a tip of $7. I guess he spent it all on coke. One time, I was in a lift during a blizzard. We arrive at a couple of lanes divided by one of those flat concrete medians. Both lanes are gridlocked. Lift driver goes watch this. And drives up the f***ing median while the cars on both sides honk furiously. I protest. And he brags that he is a big man in the city and the cops won't touch him. Anyway, it's not an erotic story. But I'd say it was definitely not safe for anyone involved. Picked up a couple from a fancy hotel party at around 3 AM. The girl was a short Latina with dark hair wearing a really short dress. 2 minutes into the ride he asked me to turn the music up. So I obliged and that's when I started hearing faint moaning noises. I looked at my rear view and sure enough, he was paddling her pink canoe. We locked eyes and I told them just not to make a mess. Guy gave a nice tip, not his, after I dropped them off. This wasn't me. And it isn't NSFW, but I think it's worth sharing. One driver told me that one time this guy got in his Uber without putting in the destination. This guy was in his mid-40s. Wearing an all-black suit and wearing sunglasses. Didn't take them off. He also had a briefcase that he put on his lap. Anyway, so he sits in the car and points forwards. So the driver takes off. They didn't speak the entire journey. It was about 40 minutes. To tell the driver where to go, the passenger just pointed left or right. Anyway, The driver tells me that he was shitting himself the entire time and genuinely thought he was going to die, but was too scared to stop. So finally they pull over at this really big old house that he described as the most mafia looking house I've ever f***ing seen. The guy takes off his glasses. Wasn't really NSFW, but on my second day doing Uber one of the clients was on house arrest. Dave was a cool guy. He wanted me to buy him some wine and smokes from the gas station. He even trusted me with his card plus PIN. When I get back I decide to just have a smoke with him. That turns into us doing take-eye in his backyard at 2 AM. Really cool dude Dave was. Hope he turned his life around. Picked up a group of young ladies during a bachelorette party. The bride-to-be sits in the front and while driving to their destination, she rolls down the window and whips out a giant DLDO for all of downtown to Chicago to see. Got off my shift at work. App designer in his early 40s picks me up to take me home. We're shooting the shitty on the way and he asks me if I smoke, which I do. I invite him in to smoke a bowl and the next thing I know this dude is grabbing a half ounce from his trunk and sitting in my backyard smoking me out for a couple hours. Now he's my drug dealer. To make conversation I always ask my Uber driver if they have any horror stories. One guy told me that he picked up this couple in all black clothes and he admitted he felt a little creeped out by them. It was the middle of the night and they had asked to be dropped off at a cemetery. He thinks perhaps they live across the road or something and fails to make conversation with them. He drops them off, looks at his phone, then looks back and they are nowhere to be seen. Disappeared. He stayed for a few minutes looking to see if they would pop up anywhere but they never did. Freaked him out big time. One 15-year-old kid got caught with over 2 pounds of pot in my car after I got stopped for speeding. If it counts. 20 plus years ago I drove for a sedan service. Picked up one of the Temptations and took him to get drugs and a hooker. It certainly wasn't safe for my work at the time, but everything worked out okay. He came out of a luxury resort and gave me a sketchy address. When we arrived, it was an abandoned convenience store. So he told me he was looking for some company. Yeah, I knew where to find that. And along the way, he said he was looking for some medicine too. So we stopped in the ghetto and got him something to smoke. Could have been weed or crack or anything. I don't know. And I didn't ask. After being told FCKU. Cop more than once. We found a pretty young lady of the evening. He asked where she's been all night. She said she's been right there waiting for him. She got in the car. They kissed and groped in the backseat on the way back to the resort. And he gave me a decent tip. INB for the inquiry. No. Well, there was the guy who proceeded to get butt naked in my backseat while piss drunk and change into a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle costume. It was Michelangelo. For the record. Not an Uber Lyft driver. But I did drive for a taxi company. I had a fare where 2 drunk people who were making out in the back of my cab. This isn't unusual on its own. Happens quite often. Just gotta stop them before shit gets out of hand. Well, one of them decides to stop making out and says to me, "Don't tell anyone." Okay. Full stop. Curious. I ask why. He responds, "We are cousins and we don't want our family to find out." Then they went back to making out again. I didn't once think they could have possibly been cousins. Never saw either people before or after. Could have just kept his mouth shut and I'd never have known. Why would you disclose that information to a stranger? Couple role-playing exhibition incest fantasy to spice things up. Not a driver. But I was having a smoke out front of my apartment when an Uber pulled up with a girl in the back seat. A neighbor from down the hall I recognized, who was screaming at the driver and refusing to get out of the vehicle. It sounded like she didn't want to pay him for the ride. It was demanding her cash back. Which didn't make sense to me because Uber isn't a cash service. When she started hitting him, I phoned the police. 15 minutes later they showed up and she still hasn't left his vehicle. The cops drag her out and arrest her. Turns out she gave the driver a blowy on the way and thought that would get her a free fare. And was more than a little upset that she still had to pay. Girl never looked me in the eyes again when we passed in the hall. I'd drive for Uber if it meant getting paid to get blowjobs. My friend told me about a couple who got into his car. They were slightly drunk talking nonsense to each other, so he didn't pay much attention. Just kept driving and occasionally checking on them through the rearview mirror. Eventually the girl got quiet, so he checked in the mirror and didn't see her. And my innocent friend thought she was asleep and even laughed about it with the guy. Well, not long after that he passed a speed bump and heard the guy saying "oh shit." At the same time a gurgling sound was heard and a smell of booze plus sour filled up the whole car. So yeah. The girl was sucking off her boyfriend whatever. The speed bump caused her to deep throat and vomit all over the backseat, and my poor friend still had to drive around with a vomit smelling car. At least they rated him 5 stars.